Max? Okay, hello everyone. My name is Pavel and welcome to Partner Education Series.
Hi everyone, my name is Marie and today we'll be navigating through a series of auction mechanisms to discover deals that works through the entire DoubleClick stack, including DoubleClick Bid Manager, and learn how to manage the most common issues related to private deals.
Oh yes, this is a very hot topic for both publishers and advertisers. We can see that, we can assume that in this year, the programmatic advertising market will grow by 30% in 2017. And this is faster growing the digital media channel in this year.
Okay, so we'll start our live sessions and we have our technical experts from Milan and Italy with us today. So I'd like to welcome Ludo, David, and Gilia, and we will ask you to submit any questions that you have on the link below this video.
Just submit the question, be more specific on your questions, and we will cover this question at the end of the session.
Okay, so hello everyone, I'm Davide. I will start the presentation and pass the ball to my colleagues in other sections. So welcome, this is a presentation about private deals best practices. And yeah, so when we designed this presentation, we were thinking about the complexity of the deal environment. And originally it may sound very simple because if you think about at the beginning, you just have three platforms: one buying platform, DBM, one exchange, ADEX. In our case, we will refer in this presentation to ADEX because we know all the dynamics, and then the ad server on the publisher side, DFP. But then when you start speaking about deals, you see that the environment becomes much more complicated because you can find different type of deals, like preferred deals, private auction, and programmatic guaranteed, and really lots of settings. So settings on the buy side, like all the strategy, the pacing, the budget, the creatives. So they are able to actually target the campaign in order to get the inventory that the buyer want to have. And on the publisher side as well, you have all the settings for the type of campaign, the price, a dynamic allocation of ads. So a lot of different settings also on the publisher side. And then all the blocks, all the complexity that comes through the different system. So our presentation today has the goal to clarify how deals are working across the different platforms. I'm an expert on the buy side. Ludovico and Giulia are experts on the sell side, on the publisher side, and we will go through all the systems together to really present what's happening and how a deal is working across all the platforms. So this is our agenda for today's session. We have the first largest part that's called the life of a deal. So we will go through the full DoubleClick stack, including DBM. So you will see the buyer view and how the buyer is targeting a programmatic campaign. And the main goal is to be able to anticipate some issues, because knowing how the buyer is setting up the campaign, you are also able to better speak with them and try to help them in making the campaign work. And then we will go through some best practices on how to set up a new deals and avoid blockers, and also how you can quickly troubleshoot your deals on your own. So let's start the life of a deal. The life of a deal starts by looking at the different types of deals. And here you can see that we grayed out most of the slide, and we are focusing just on one single type of deal. That's the preferred deal. The reason is that this type of deal is probably the most common in all the markets. And it's also the most complicated type of deals that we know. The reason is that there is floor price, there is an auction involved, targeting is possible, is non-guaranteed. So there are many different details, many different settings that we really need to take care when setting up preferred deals. But you can really see that there are other different types of deals. Some of the concepts will be applicable also to programmatic deals, programmatic guaranteed deals, and private auctions as well. But please keep in mind that we are mostly focused on preferred deal in this presentation. And this is the view of a private deal or a preferred deal in our case. One thing that you should remind is in the title of this slide: no volume and delivery guarantees. That's very important. A preferred deal is not a guarantee of volume and delivery on both sides. This means that the buyer is able to not buy everything that's being sold or offered through the deal. And at the same time, the publisher has no obligation to really sell, to provide the exact amount of inventory that was negotiated. This also means that we see this type of waterfall that we see in the middle. So you may start with a high number of ad requests, the actual request that you collect on your website, and then you end up with a limited amount of impressions being bought from the buyer. The main reason is that the same inventory on the publisher side is maybe offered through many different deals. And the other reason is that the buyer, as we said, can apply targeting and pacing and apply a budget to the campaign. So out of the inventory that you are offering to the buyer is able to discard some inventory because this is not what they are targeting, or they do not want to spend too much money on that deal, and then in the end they end up buying less impressions. What we want to do now is go through the various steps and understand at each single step what may be a cause for discarding an ad request, what may be the cause for not buying that deal. And this is the life of a deal. So we will go through every single step. We start from the left, where you see the user that is visiting a website. This is creating the ad request. The ad request is going then to DFP that will allocate this to a specific campaign. If there is a programmatic opportunity and this is not going directly to a reservation campaign, there will be a call to one or more exchanges. For the sake of this presentation, we will focus on an ADEX as an example. The main reason is that we know how ADEX is working, and we will be able to give you the details of the auction mechanism on ADEX. But please keep in mind that similar rules may apply to the different exchanges, so you can get in touch with exchanges if you want to really understand how their auction mechanism is working. Then we will see the DSP work, the DSP word. The exchange will send a bid request to many DSPs. We will focus on our DSP, so DBM, Double Click Bid Manager, and we will see what's happening and what are the targeting choices. DBM, the DSP, will go back to the exchange. There will be the actual auction or the actual decision for what is the winning buyer. And then when this is decided, this will go back to DFP. And in DFP, we will have the last steps and then the survey. So I will now pass the ball to Giulia that will cover the first two steps in DFP and ADEX.
Thanks, Davide. So basically the first step, as Davide was mentioning in the life of a deal, is DFP. So user visits a website and this trigger called to the DFP tags. And now we're going to see what's happening in the first step. So what DFP is deciding whether to call ADEX, if there's space to call ADEX or not. So for any single impression, DFP will first of all gather all the relevant information within the ad server to actually understand if there is space to call ADEX. As you all know, within the ad server, you have very different types of campaign. So we have sponsorship, standard campaigns, ADEX as well. So through a mechanism that is called enhanced dynamic allocation, and we're going to dedicate a few slides a little bit over in the presentation, DFP is able to understand if there is space to call ad exchange, and means that if standards or sponsorship campaigns are suffering from delivery or not. If they don't suffer from any type of delivery issue, then we're going to call ad exchange to understand among all the buyers what's the best deal available for the yield of the publisher. So in this slide, you see that if there is a sponsorship campaign or a standard campaign that is suffering delivery, you may incur into a problem of seeing 0 ad requests. And that means that DFP is deciding not to call AdX for a specific deal because it needs to deliver all of the direct campaigns sold by the sales of the publisher itself. So this screenshot of the deal check from the publisher perspective is a good example of not a deal not transacting because there are too many directly sold campaigns and no ad request is reaching that specific deal in AdX. But if there is space for AdX, so if there is not any problem of delivery of direct campaign, then AdX will be called. And the first thing that AdX does is to actually execute different checks and understand which are the best bidder to call. And the checks that the AdExchange is doing is, for example, on pre-filtering. Let's say it checks the content of an URL and understand if there's any sensitive category involved, like weapon or adult content, etc., as well as technical setting of the DSPs. So in this presentation, we're mainly talking about DBM, but other DSPs may have issue like a quota of call outs they can receive in a day or in a specific time. So these are all pre-filtering reasons they may exclude a DSP over another to be called by AdExchange. So once all these pre-filtering are checked, AdX will call all the relevant bidder. DBM is one of them, all the other DSPs, as well as AdWords. And this call will create a list of possible winner for that specific ad request. So let's go back to Davide and understand if DBM is the DSP involved, what's happening on the other side.
Yeah. So let's go back into DBM and let's see how things are working on the buy side. This is the view that the buyers have in a tool that we call Deals Troubleshooter. It's very similar to Deals Check if you're familiar with the tool on DFP. We have this deal funnel. So we go through 4 main steps. First step is available impression, eligible impression. Step 2, bids submitted. Third step, and then bids won. It's the last step that we have. And the graphics on the right side is actually showing the various steps and the filtering that is happening. Let's go through the various steps. So on top of this kind of funnel, we have this view that's just a quick chart where you can see the status of the deal. So all the buyers are able for a deal that's in DBM to see this kind of view. And they have 3 main lines. So the blue line is representing the bids requests that are received from the publisher and the exchange. So this is actually a number that should match the number of ad requests that you have on your site, more or less, because as we have seen, some requests may be filtered on the exchange. So we do expect a little bit of discrepancies. But if everything is set up correctly, we should see a blue line here with some bid request. Then we do have a red line. The red line is when DBM has responded. So the number of times that the targeting was okay, the bid was okay, we want to respond and we want to participate in the auction. The last line, orange, is the impressions won. So the actual impression that the actual auction that we won and we got an impression. You may see that the lines may be far away. So the blue line is very far from the red line. This can even be okay. This really depends on every single deal. So it's concerning for the buyer when they see the blue line to 0. That's usually a concern that makes the buyer think this is a publisher issue. Usually maybe the publisher has not enabled the deal yet, is not sending bid request at all. So that's a very simple issue. The fact that it may be higher than the red line, this may be okay because maybe the publisher is offering a high number of impressions, like 8,000 here, 8 million here. And the budget on the buyer side is much smaller. So they only buy a reduced set of those impressions. But to really understand what's happening, I mean, the graph is just first quick view if everything is okay. We need to go through the funnel that we've seen before. And I will actually go through the main reasons for filtering impression on the buy side. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, you are able to filter a lot of different parameters. And there are no specific rules for private deals if you compare it with open auction. So you are essentially able to use all the same settings as in open auction. The main concern is that since the inventory through a deal is much more limited, a lot of different targeting settings will maybe produce any issue in spending, so will cause low spending or no spending in your campaign. So we normally suggest to the buyers to try to keep the spending, to try to keep the targeting to a reasonable level in order to get sustainable spending. So first step, we start from the total available impressions, the ad request, and we do two main filterings. One is for creative and one is what we call line item not eligible. Right now we are seeing the creative. So we do have many different reasons for the creative not to be eligible. The first thing is that the creative should match the publisher inventory. So if it's a display creative, in example, the size of the creative should be matched. If it's an expandable, the expandable should be supported. Or if it's a video, we need to support all the different video settings like VPAID or skippability or video length. So everything should be matched from a creative point of view. It's also important to remind that we do have a creative approval process on the buy side. This creative approval process is a one or two step process. It depends on the exchange. So we have a creative review in DBM plus a creative review that's happening on several different exchanges, including ADEX. And this creative review is essentially saying if this creative can run through programmatic or not. So a creative that gets rejected may simply not run at all. So this is something that should be fixed on the buy side. And then we also have four-party calls and pixel that needs to be approved. The main one are obviously approved, but if the buyer is using some new pixel or some strange calls to create some dynamics in the creative that we didn't approve, this may lead to rejections. So we really need to check that everything from a creative point of view is okay. Usually, this is an area where when there is an issue, is actually a real issue with the actual creative asset. While the next area, line item not eligible, is when the targeting is involved. So DBM targeting can offer something like 20 different options for targeting. Here we see the top three categories that are content, technology, and audience. But inside those categories, you already see some example of the different options that are available. Like content, the buyer is able to select specific websites, so a white list of sites. They can go for brand safety targeting. They can add keywords or website categories. So they can really filter out the inventory from the publisher and select the inventory they really want. Technology, if they want to go on specific environments, specific browsers, specific devices. So that's another area where we see some filtering. And then a large chunk of our filtering is happening on audiences. And this means that the buyer can do targeting for a first or third party audience, or they can use frequency capping in example. So they can filter out impression if they don't want to overexpose a single user. So you see there are many different filtering options, and these may reduce the available inventory or the bought inventory from your campaign. What do the buyers see? We do not just provide the number of impression that gets filtered, but we provide a list of the targeting criteria, and we give a quick view of the filtering. So this is an example that you can see for geography, an example for one deal. So if you click on line item not eligible, you have this type of view. On the left part, you have an impression breakdown. So this is the breakdown of the impressions coming from the publisher. And here we see that this deal has over 88% of impression coming from Italy, but a small part of other impression are coming from other countries. Our buyer on the right is using a targeting setting for Italy. So this means that about 12% of our impression will be filtered just by the geography, because they are not coming all from Italy. The same approach applies to the different tabs that you see on top. I'll just show you some. It's not a complete list here, but you have geography, as we have seen, but we can quickly see the environment, we can see the creative size, we can see brand safety labels, you can see demographics, you can see video and device type. So you can cover most of the common targeting settings. This is not all. Unfortunately, we are not able to cover all the possible settings and immediately give to the buyer an answer or about what's wrong in the deal. There are other possible reasons that are not directly covered in the tool. And the buyer has an option to run a report that's called inventory availability report that helps in finding other possible reasons for targeting to be the cause of not spending. But sometimes this gets complicated, so our support team is also giving a direct help if this is needed to understand if maybe keywords are the key issue for low spending or the device or another setting. So there are many different targeting reasons that the buyer should be aware. Unfortunately, on the publisher side, this is very transparent to you. So you have no direct view of all those settings. What you can do is speak to the buyer and try to understand if there is anything that's causing this issue, and then maybe can be removed from the targeting. The next step, we went from the available impression to the eligible impression. So we removed all the impressions that were out of our targeting. We go into eligible impression, and here we are in the budget section mostly. So out of all the impressions that are okay to be targeted, we need to buy only a number of impressions that is compatible with our spending goal, with our budget definition. So here we actually filter on the total budget for the campaign. We do filter on the pacing. So we may want to spend an even pacing during the campaign. So let's say that campaign is 10,000 euros. You want to, and it's 10 days campaign, you want to spend 1,000 euro every single day. In that case, we may need to drop some impression to keep the spending to the right level and do not go overspending at the end of the day. And then the last reason is frequency capping. So the buyer may choose to not bid a fixed amount of time on a single user or a single cookie. So in that case, we just want to apply frequency capping. And in the view, you really see how many impressions are being filtered by the frequency, how many by the budget, how many by the pacing. So you have a quick view of what's happening in the filtering phase. And then the last phase, all the impressions that are passing through the filters are getting into the bid, and we go into the actual auction. So we respond to the exchange with our bid. What's happening here? There are three main reasons for filtering. One reason is the one called below the minimum bid. This means that the most frequent case is that the buyer has set his bid value under the floor price. This is usually a misunderstanding maybe in the negotiation, but this may happen. So in that case, all the impressions are getting filtered because under the floor price, we see the floor price from the publisher, so we won't even bid to the exchange. The other reasons are actually auction cases where we do see where we are bidding, but we lose the auction. How this could happen? As we said, we are focusing today on preferred deals. And preferred deals are a type of deal where we have a fixed floor price. So why do we have an auction here? So we call it auction, although there is not a real second price auction. The auction, we will go to the details now, but essentially the auction will compare the different floor price and decide who wins. On DBM, we will have a first internal auction. The internal auction will decide which buyers in DBM across the different partners and advertiser should participate in the actual auction on the exchange. So we will have a first internal auction. Then we will go to the exchange, in our case, ADEX. So we will respond to ADEX. There is an auction in ADEX. We will go through the details, and someone will win. So we will not win every single time. So we will get some auction loss externally. So let's see a little bit more the auction mechanism, because this is an area that can get quite confusing, especially on preferred deals, and we want to make some clarity. The first thing that we need to make clear is a concept that's very important for ADDX, but also for other exchanges. That's the concept of a seat. So exchanges like ADDX are defining some seats that are actually opportunities to take part into the auction, so to enter the room and play with your bid. And usually you have big agencies like Agency A here that has its own private seat. Another Agency B will have a different private seat. And then we also have a generic ADDX seat for DBM. This is the case of smaller players that have no direct ADDX contract, so they will still be able to participate in deals, negotiate with publisher, have all the same services, but without an actual private seat. On every single seat, then you will have multiple advertisers. The seat is usually by agency, so an agency can manage different advertisers, many advertisers at the same time. So maybe in the same auction, we have many different advertisers just on DBM, even before competing against other DSPs and other players in the market. What is important to know is that when you set up the deal, it may get very confusing to know what is the seat ID, what is the name of the partner. Usually the best way for publisher is to negotiate the deal using the DBM partner name that's the same name as the DBM marketplace name. And buyers can really find it in a second, and usually they know it. And it's in the DBM UI, the top right corner. You see in this case, it's my name, Di Ferraro, test partner. So the agency will have agency partner or something like that. So they will have an easy name, and you can find it in marketplace to send the deal through the process. But then what's happening when we have the actual auction? This is the case of overlapping deals, because one of the first thing you may say immediately is, but if I have a direct deal, one-on-one deals like a preferred deal, how this is happening that there is an actual auction, because we have one deal and one buyer, one publisher. In reality, you are able to do overlapping deals. So you may have different type of deals sharing the same inventory. And that's the case that we see here. Same inventory going through different floor prices to different agencies in different seats. The first rule is, and the basic rule is, the highest floor price in a preferred deal wins. So if we check Agency A, we immediately see that advertiser 2 that has a floor of 12 euro CPM will win over advertiser 1 and 3. And easily you can think about Agency B and immediately see that advertiser 6 has an higher floor price. But what's happening with the generic DBM seat? In this case, we see that we have two advertisers with the same floor price. We are doing in this example for the generic DBM seat, but please keep in mind that this can happen even for a dedicated seat. So it's not something just for the generic seat. It's the case where on a seat you have two advertisers bidding on the same floor price. So what's happening in DBM at this stage? Please keep in mind, I'm saying it now because it may get confusing. This is what's happening in DBM, so on our DSP. On ADDX, the rule will be a little bit different, and we will get to that a little bit later as well. But here, we need to find something that differentiates advertiser 7 from advertiser 9. And what we do in this very specific case, but it's a very, very specific case, we also have a look at another parameter, that's the bid value. As you can see here, we have a bid of 15 euros and a bid of 12 euros, and the highest bid wins. Keep in mind that this is happening overlapping deal, same seat, and same floor price. The bid value will be just the one that defines who wins in this auction, but the actual price that the buyer will pay will be the floor price, because this is still a preferred deal, so the price is negotiated. There won't be an actual auction in the process. So just as a summary, if there is a different floor price, the highest floor price is winning. If we have the same floor price, the highest bid will win. So what are some recommendations that we do with our buyers? If they have a private seat, the best way is to keep track of your deals, especially if you are on the same publisher, and use the bid value to give a sort of order of priority. And if they don't realize what is the advertiser, what advertisers are bidding the deal, our support team can help in finding out where they can actually raise the bid or what other advertiser is taking all the inventory. If they use a generic DBM seat, it's much more complicated because they are essentially comparing and participating in the auction against other partners that are actually other agencies. So they have no power to know what's happening on their side and and we can't communicate also what's happening because that will be confidential for every single agency. So what they can do is negotiate with the publisher an higher floor price. Higher floor price means higher precedence. It's certainly more costly, but that will give probably more inventory. If they really want that inventory, we do have the option to consider programmatic guaranteed. So move away from the non-guaranteed preferred deals into really guaranteed inventory. So that will be everything that will be negotiated will be provided. Another option is to get a private seat and go in the left part, in the blue part of the slide, or try to increase the bid. The reason is that we say under exchange limits is that if you increase the bid to crazy values, that will create issues on the exchange and your responses will be automatically rejected. So that will not be a good move at all. So those are the main best practices we give to the buyers. And now from DBM, we have seen that the three buyers are sending, three advertisers are sending their request and participate in the auction that's happening into the exchange. So I'll go back to Ludovico for the presentation of what's happening in ADEX and then in DFP.
We are now back in ADEX where DBM bids come in. And so before they are able to compete in the auction, in the ADEX auction, against all other types of inventory, they have to pass a number of filters. So what is ADEX looking at to decide if a bid is valid and can take part in the auction? There are two main things. The first one is a set of rules applied to the creative. So the creative have to match a set of requirements, most of which are set by the publisher through rules. If the creative isn't passing those requirements, is meeting them, it will be discarded and won't be able to take part in the auction. The second set of requirements is tied to the landing page URL declared in the bid. And the publisher there too is able to block a few things that will prevent the bid from transacting in ADEX. So on a deal, you have a flag where you can disable blocks for the deal. And that is very useful. And we always recommend you flag it because it will allow ADEX to bypass a few checks. You also have an option of overriding a few things at serving time after bids start to come in. For example, you can override a creative classification for an advertiser mapping directly in the UI. It's a new thing. So once the bid comes into ADEX, you are able to see what happens in deal check. And for filtered bids, deal check gives you a very useful overview of what happened and why a bid was discarded. For example, if a bid is filtered because it didn't meet a blocking rule on advertiser URL or category, you're able to go in deal check for a specific deal and see which category was blocked. And then you are able to lift the block or talk to the buyer and check why they're sending something that is not meeting your requirements. So now that bids have passed through the filters, defined in ADEX, they are able to take part in the auction and compete against the other transaction types. So let's make a quick detour and see what transaction types are able to run inside ADEX. So we split into two huge groups. The first one is guaranteed types, and the second one is non-guaranteed types. Guaranteed types, or type, because there's a single one, are special. Because as Davide said, as we mentioned before, a programmatic guaranteed runs alone. It always wins the auction because it's guaranteed to beat everything else. So what we are looking at, preferred deals, are part of the non-guaranteed segment. And in this segment, you have preferred deals, private auctions, and the open auction. There's a tiering applied by ADEX where preferred deals always beat private auctions, and private auctions always win against the open auction. There's a small caveat we have to do here because the open auction can influence private auctions, but it's a very specific thing. If we look at preferred deals, they always beat the other transaction types. So let's look at an example of an auction. What happens in ADEX when you get different bids, let's say 3 bids from DBM, the ones we saw earlier with Davide, and 2 bids from other DSPs. All the bids are for private deals, and so the only thing that matters here is the floor. So who wins this auction? The bid with the highest floor price, because for PD, the only thing that matters is the floor price. Let's look at that slightly more complex example where you have 2 deals overlapping on the same inventory using the same floor. What happens in ADEX? Differently from what Davide explained for DBM, ADEX doesn't take into account the bid value. So the 2 deals compete one against each other at the same priority level. And so ADEX splits wins between the 2 deals equally. How do you see if a deal is losing against another deal with a higher or similar floor? Again, in deal check. It's such a common occurrence that deal check special cases it. About a year and a half ago, we didn't have a detail for overlapping bids in deal check, and it was very confusing. Now, deal check clearly shows what's happening. So partially hidden by the detail, you see bid met minimum price, but was beaten by an overlapping deal. And you can open a detail window and see which deals are winning because they are bidding, they got bids on the same piece of inventory. So it's very easy to check why a deal is not transacting if it's due to overlapping deals. So we have a winning deal, a winning bid for a deal. So ADEX sends this piece of information back to DFP. And let's look at what happens in DFP. DFP cannot allow an ADEX bid to serve, an ADEX impression to serve, without first checking if it can compete against all the other campaigns that are eligible on that piece of inventory. So what DFP checks are 2 things. One, if it's a guaranteed campaign that should serve or that is competing against ADEX, what matters for DFP is its status. How far along is it in satisfying its goals? So the farther along it is and the higher its level of satisfaction, the more ADEX will be able to beat it. For remnant line items, DFP only looks at the booked CPM. Let's look a bit more in detail how this works. DFP uses a feature called Enhanced Dynamic Allocation, EDA, to have DFP campaigns compete against ADEX. If we look back in time before EDA, what happened was that DFP had served first all guaranteed line items and then had ADEX win on any remaining inventory. So it wasn't a very smart way of doing things, and it wasn't guaranteed to maximize yield because requests are different one from the other. What can raise the value for ADEX is interspersed between different requests. It might be a user cookie, it might be something very specific that usually isn't limited to a specific portion in time or of inventory. So DFP introduced EDA to have ADEX compete granularly against DFP. How it does this is looking at the satisfaction level of campaigns and filling gradually all remaining inventory projected in the future. So DFP projects inventory in the future and looks at how much is left after, how much will be left after direct campaigns have served, have satisfied their goals. And then it spreads this amount of inventory over the whole campaign lifetime and has ADEX compete against each request. So DFP sets a price called a third-party reserve price that ADEX needs to beat that expresses the satisfaction level of direct campaigns. It's a much smarter way of dealing with yield, of maximizing yield. If you look at deal troubleshooting, unfortunately, it's also a way of having a valid bid from ADEX lose against DFP. So what it does is setting a floor, a third-party reserve price that ADEX needs to beat. And the floor is measured against the deal floor. So the deal floor needs to beat the third-party reserve price for ADEX to be able to serve. How do you check if ADEX is losing against direct campaigns? Again, deal check is showing you clearly this. And again, it's something that was introduced last year because it was a source of much confusion for publishers. So in deal check, you are clearly able to see if direct campaigns are behind, if they're overbooked, and if a bid, a valid ADEX bid, is losing against DFP competition. So now that we close the circle, we can look at the whole deal funnel in deal check. Deal funnel is a very specific term that goes back to what Davide was showing at the beginning. It's the life of a request through all the funnel before it is converted into an impression. And deal check shows this by splitting it into 4 specific parts, which are the same parts we use in troubleshooting. So the first part is ad requests, the number of ad requests received from the ad server. So if you have no ad requests, it means something is wrong, usually with the targeting, or a line item is overbooked, and we'll see more about that later. The second number is bids. How many times did the buyer bid for requests where this deal was eligible? So this troubleshooting on this is a lot on the buy side part because there isn't much you can do. But again, we'll see how you can go a bit deeper if you need to troubleshoot no bids. And then once bids come back to ADEX, bids need to be allowed in the auction. So you have bids filtered and bids that go into the auction, and then winning bids and match requests. So what happens in troubleshooting is all the spaces between each section, the ratios between requests and bids, the ratios between bids and bids allowed into the auction, the ratios between bids in the auction and winning bids. Another tool you can use in ADEX to have a quick overview of how deals are running is the deals overview, where you have 2 columns showing requests and impressions that give you a quick at-a-glance overview of a deal's health. And finally, the query tool, where you can use deal IDs or deal names, both as filters and dimensions, and then check the win ratio to see if it matches your expectations. And now we are to the publisher's best practices and yeah.
So
Thanks, everyone. So basically, we have split up the phases of a deal into three main areas. The negotiation phases, where buyer and seller negotiate the floor price and the type of inventory they want the publisher to send, so on and so forth. The setup, so everything that comes into setting up the deal, both on the sell side and on the buyer side, and then the delivery. So once the deal is set up, the troubleshooting phase that we have covered into this talk. So there are best practices in every phase. The negotiation phase is where, exactly as I said before, buyer and seller try to agree on CPM floor, as well as the type of inventory the publisher is going to send to the buyer. What we suggest is that expectations should be set with the buyer in terms of many different things. So first of all, the desired inventory. It should be clear for buyer and seller what's the environment that the buyer wants to buy and the publisher is able to sell, between display, in-app, video, etc. They should agree on specific URL. So knowing the inventory of the publisher on the buy side is super important. And also, if there are some parts of the publisher inventory they don't want to target, they need to clarify those things in advance. Geography and audience segments are also very valuable where we have a publisher that is basically international, for instance, and has a lot of different targeted audience on their content. Buyer and seller also need to agree on creative specs. As we said, some part of the filtering is caused by ad sizes or formats that have some technologies that the publisher, for instance, don't accept. So a case where a buyer, for example, wants to buy a Lightbox ad needs to check with the publisher that that specific technology is accepted by the publisher in order to avoid a total filtering of the deal. Finally, campaign setting like pricing, estimated volume, the duration, pacing, these are all the things that the buyer should share with the seller to make sure that a coherent and a realistic forecast of the inventory can be done. When it comes to deal setup is basically the process that comes after the negotiation. And our best practices here are to ensure that inventory targeting criteria matches the campaign expectations. So if we have like a publisher website that is mainly targeting male audience, and we know that our buyer will filter only female target, that could be a mismatch that can be avoidable from the very beginning. Also, significantly higher inventory volume compared to the campaign budget and pacing requirements may result in a very low response rate because simply the buyer cannot afford to buy too much. Another suggestion is advertiser-specific targeting. So ensure that the bid response are not getting filtered due to invalid advertiser. So if a buyer and a seller decided to input the advertiser in the deal, and the advertiser is not mandatory, but if they decide to input, then they need to make sure that it matches from the bid requests and the bid response. Finally, they can consider enabling block override in the deals. For instance, if the advertiser is an alcohol advertiser and the publisher doesn't want to accept alcohol in every part of the website, they can block override those sensitive category in a specific deal. Just keep in mind that block override is a functionality that don't cover everything. So technologies, for instance, cannot be block override. Some technologies like the Google Expandable technology is a good example, as well as cookie and data cannot be override. But sensitive category is a good example where a buyer can propose a deal for an alcohol advertiser. And also is recently been launched the possibility via ADEX and DBM to do deal on that specific categories. Finally, again, in the deal setup phases, there's the topic of overlapping targeting criteria. as we have seen in the previous slide with Davide, this will result in only one of the eligible deals winning per impression, and also if it can have a consequence if they have different branding types and they are set up with buyers on the same DSP. So we need to bear in mind all these best practice both in negotiation and setup phase. I pass the word to Ludo for the last part.
So let's have a quick look at deal troubleshooting. How can you troubleshoot a deal that is not working or that appears to be not working? So as we saw earlier, when we looked at deal check, you have to look at what is not working, meaning, is there one of the metrics that is zero? Is one of the ratios we saw earlier that tends to zero or is very low? So the first thing to do is look at this through stages. So you have to look at deal check and really look at the numbers. So the first thing, check add requests. Do you have add requests? Yes, no. If you have no add requests, it might be very easy. So start by looking at what's happening in DFP. So have you got a very overbooked DFP, which is not even able to send requests to ADEX because its direct campaigns are too late, too behind their goals? Or is your deal targeted to something that isn't matching the requests you're sending to ADEX? This happens all the time, especially if you mix DFP ad units and tags. You may cross targeting data in a way that makes no sense. It's very easy to do this. Or playing with sizes in deals. One of the things you usually need to do in deals is be fairly loose with targeting, because otherwise you risk shooting yourself in the foot. And then once you have done that, you might have a fairly good idea of what's not working. Well, another thing, of course, check that you are targeting the right ADEX property, meaning display, mobile, etc. So you have requests, but you aren't getting any bids back from the buyer. So this is a bit hard to troubleshoot from our side, from the sell side. But there are a few things you can do. First thing, of course, is talk to the buyer. Ask them what they are not liking in requests, what they are targeting that you are not sending, or ask them if they have budget on their campaign, because they might not be spending because they don't have any budget left. So talk to your buyer, ask them for screenshots of deal troubleshooter, ask them for screenshot of requests they see coming in DBM that aren't matching what they expect. And if you get bids and those bids are filtered, this is the third thing you need to check. So check your blocking opt-in rules, as Julia was saying. Check for invalid advertiser, and this is something you can easily override by yourself on the ad review center. Check anything that might be filtering the bid, and if nothing matches, of course, you have to check deal check and look at the rejection reasons you see there. If nothing is filtered, then start looking at DFP. What are the rates of the competing DFP line items? Again, is my deal bid losing because a direct campaign is behind and it's competing against ADEX at a very high price? Is it losing to a remnant campaign which has a very high CPM? Or is the deal losing against other deals? So deal check exposes all these reasons. And before calling support, make sure you have gone through all of them and properly looked at deal check.
Okay, so let's go to the questions. Please give us a couple of minutes that we go to see the form that you submitted on the question, and we will review the question. So stay on the line for 1-2 minutes and we will get back to you.
Okay, I can take the first one from Rafa. So from the ADEX side, how can we differentiate from unmatched requests due to high floor price in ADEX and not enough bid price to beat DFP dynamic allocation? As we saw earlier, maybe this question was asked before we showed the relevant slides, but deal check makes it very easy to check for this. You have two different rejection reasons, as we call them. One is below CPM, meaning the bid is not clearing the floor price of the deal, and the other is losing against the third-party reserve price, meaning DFP is beating whatever ADEX is sending back.
Okay, I can take one on DBM that I see. There is no name from the sender, but the question is, can DBM buyers target based on viewability on a placement level or site level? Yes. That's one of the targeting options that we have in DBM. That's called viewability or active view. That's the official term. And this means that the buyer are able to filter out the inventory based on the predicted level of viewability. That's usually expressed by a percent, like 10% viewable, 20%, up to 100% viewable. Viewability is measured on every single bid request based on a set of parameters and based on historical data from that bid request. So we do the measurement every single impression, and then we use that to predict the probability of an impression to be viewable. That means that they filter out inventory. Viewability is not something that we can match in this troubleshooter and see directly, but it's probably one of the higher causes for low spending. The main reason is that it's very hard from the publisher point of view to increase the viewability level, and on some cases, buyers can really ask for a very high viewability, even to some levels that are not easily achievable, and that means really a lot of impression get lost. So what we recommend to the buyers is, in general, to not, to try to keep the level of viewability very low whenever possible. And especially if they already negotiated with the publisher for some specific inventory, like an home page or a very prominent inventory, to even remove the viewability setting. That will allow to get a better spending. One thing that we also recommend them, but that's not applied to private deals, is a new feature for viewability that's called active view optimization. In that context, we will be able to bid on all inventory, so we don't filter, but we optimize the bid value based on the expected level of viewability. So if we expect that impression will get as a high probability to be viewable, we will bid higher. We really want to buy that impression. If we know, if we expect the impression to be not very viewable, we will bid less. But in that way, we will bid on much more inventory. There will be less inventory unsold, and at the same time, we will avoid spending issue like the one where we are not able to buy everything that we really want to buy.
Okay, I can take the next one from Debra. When we set up a preferred auction, I understand that deal will take precedence over any other bids. ADEX, EDA, and other DFP line items in price priority. Therefore, there's a risk that I sell inventory in a preferred deal that would have garnered a higher CPM in open auction. Is that the same case with private auction? If not, how does it differ? Does the private auction compete with ADEX, EDA, and other DFP line items priority? So we looked at it a bit when we talked about the different transaction types that run in the ADEX auction. So preferred auction, open auction, PD make really no difference when you're talking ADEX competing against DFP. So think about it as two different things. One thing is ADEX needs to pick a winning bid. How does it do that? It first looks at private deals, all the bids that clear the floor, and then the bid with the highest floor. No PD, let's switch to PA. Is there a winning bid from a private auction? in OPA, let's look at open auction. Do we have a winning bid? Yes. Once it has selected a bid, ADEX looks at the competing price set by DFP, which is either a price defined by DFP to express how behind on their goals direct campaigns are, or the straight CPM you entered in a reservation line item. And then it balances the two values, the competing price in DFP, the winning bid in ADEX. So actually, you may be getting less from a private deal than what you could get from an open auction bid. But on a private deal, you have kind of guarantees, not guarantees of buying, but guarantees on the floor to always get bids that have the same floor. On open auction, it's a coin toss. So maybe Julia has a bit more insights since she is very expert on the ADEX buy side.
Well, yeah, when we look at the buy side, definitely it makes a lot of difference the type of bidder that the buyer is using. AdWords as a bidder is used by many different type of advertiser. We have very big brands with the complex strategies and very good budgets behind investment. When it comes to other type of advertiser using AdWords, we have also small businesses and less savvy advertiser. DSPs are normally used by agencies, kind of big agencies, and behind those investments, we only have big advertisers. So for when we look at on a buyer perspective, definitely deals, since they require a negotiation, they are also a signal. They're most of the time a signal of having like an important advertiser behind. And if you are a publisher that cares about who is buying your inventory and also like a standing of the branding you're putting in your own page or in your more important part of the website, then definitely private deal, preferred deal may get you less CPM for a single ad request, but a longer value in the medium long term. So I think that makes sense also to have this buyer perspective.
We do have one other question from Lisette. I hope to pronounce the name correctly. How long we have to wait to start seeing results at request on a deal that start, for example, today? Yeah, we can answer on both sides. I can answer for the buy side in DBM. This should be, we can call it live data. It's not immediately live, but after a few hours, you should be able to see the data. So you are actually able to see the data for today. If the deal has been just set up, you may need to wait few hours, 3-4 hours, something like that. I would recommend before complaining or contacting support. But you should be able to see the data from today. In DBM from reports, this is not happening. Reports is the day you need to check for yesterday. Maybe you can say what's for this check.
For deal check, I actually don't know. I think it goes through data about twice a day. I am not exactly sure about the timing. What I know is that once you create a deal, propagation to the front ends and serving stack is near instant. So time is usually spent on the DBM side, setting up everything, and then with the creative approval, etc. So our side is much faster. And as for reporting, the tables the query tool looks at are, let's say, they can be behind about 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So you should be able to start seeing data in the query tool very soon after you have booked a new deal. But then there won't be anything if DBM isn't buying. So your problem is waiting for the buy side to actually start buying.
Okay, so we do have one more question. I think it's for you and Julia. Oh, sorry, I'm just losing. Can we, as movie theaters network, question is from Bianca, create an exclusive private deal for a group of advertisers like movie distributors, and this group can have a higher preference, than others? Precedence, yeah, probably.
Well, do you want to take it?
No, go.
I'm looking at a low level because I'm a tech guy. Maybe Julia has more insights
But
from the marketplace. But
yeah, from the sales perspective, you can set up a deal with different advertiser. We mentioned in the presentation that advertiser in the deal setup is a optional field. Exactly. So you can normally, for a publisher, it's good to put an advertiser, because if there's an agency behind, you are sure that the agency is using that deal only for a specific advertiser. And so you have control among sensitive advertisers or advertisers that maybe you don't want on your website. But in this situation, you're figuring out, basically, we don't have an agency in between. We have some third-party advertiser that is representing many other advertisers on the other side, but that belongs to the same category. So since it's a deal, the negotiation is done between the buyer and the seller, and if the seller accepts this, this deal, I see no problem behind this type of situation. We have big brands like P&G or Nestle that has a lot of sub-brands, and also they do some sort of negotiation similar to this one, so they can replicate a single deal for multiple advertisers. So it's something that should be clear with the publisher before, because the publisher wants to ultimately have control on who is buying the inventory, and the deal is created exactly to have one of the highest control on this. So I think that is absolutely good as long as it's negotiable.
Yeah, and I fully agree, and I think much of it depends on how many buyers do you have. You have a single buyer representing multiple advertisers, make a private deal, and then maybe you don't set any blocks at the advertiser level. Don't target it to a single specific advertiser, because it's very easy to go in the ad review center, filter creatives by deal ID, and then you'll see all the creatives that serve through that deal, and you will be able to check what the buyer is sending and block some creatives. You have different buyers, you can set up a private auction. And as for priority, on private deals, as we saw, all is made by the deal floor. So negotiate a high floor and you will be guaranteed to have priority.
Okay, so let's see if any more question is coming. I think we are getting probably out of time for our Hangout on Air today. So thanks everyone for attending and sending your question. We hope that the content was interesting and useful for you. And see you on the next Hangout on Air.
Maybe.
Maybe. And everyone a nice evening or day, depending on where you are right now. Thanks everyone for attending. Bye.
Thank you very much.